I want to tell you one story for the U.S. Olympic Committee. When we started figuring out what social media was back in 2008 and 2009, Facebook was the first platform where we wanted to be engaged with fans. And when we started, cruising around Facebook to see what was happening related to the Olympics, we found an Olympic fan site that had 77,000 followers. It had been formed by a woman named Stephanie from the Midwest. And I just started reaching out to her and saying, how did you build this fan site? What do people care about? What questions do they ask? And just through a series of phone calls with her, I got to the point where I mustered up my courage and said, Stephanie, is it okay if we take over the fan site that you've already built with your 77,000 fans? And so we had exactly the same experience as Marcus Collins, who discovered the Beehive, a group that was already engaged in talking about Beyonce.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples. Not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz. Real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Perhaps you're a key business leader and you just acquired a company. Or maybe you're starting your first job right out of college. Either way, you have to find a way to be effective with your new team and make a good first impression. How do you do that? I love my next guest's description of how her CEO handled new brands after an acquisition. He came in quietly, not throwing your weight around or boasting about how great you are and all the wonderful things you will do. He came in quietly. Here to share that story, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Lauren Pasquale Bartlett, the CMO of Ingenovis Health.
Hello, Daniel. Good morning.
Great to have you here, Lauren. So let's take a quick look at your background. I'm just cherry-picking here off your LinkedIn, a lot more positions you had, but you started out as a PR and production assistant at NFL Films. You were the manager of programming development on the NFL Internet Network for the NFL, director of internet communications for USA Hockey, director of digital media for the U.S. Olympic Committee, and you shifted into the healthcare space where you were SVP of marketing at Fast Staff Travel Nursing and now CMO of its parent company, Ingenovis Health. So as Ingenovis Health has tripled in size in 2 years, reporting $2 billion in annual revenue in 2022, and Bartlett, you manage a team of more than 30 across 8 brands. So what is your day like as CMO?
Well, I will begin by saying that every day is a good one, even the tough ones. I have the best marketing team I've ever worked with, which I'm really proud of, and a visionary leader. So I think, a lot of us have had so many positions by this time. I think a great team, a great leader really makes your day great. So my focus on a daily basis mostly rotates from marketing strategy and data analytics, like most marketers. And then also I spend about a third of my time on brand building and about a third of my time and focus on purpose.
All right, makes sense. Well, as I mentioned, you have a long and illustrious career in 2 major industries. So let's take a look at lessons we can learn from the things you made. That's a great thing we get to do as marketers. Like I've said, I've never been a podiatrist or actuary or anything else, but I don't know that they get to make things. We get to make brands, we get to make products, we get to make campaigns. It's a lot of fun. So the first lesson you said is understand the power of the collective. And how did you learn this lesson?
Yeah, so this was a really early lesson in my career. I had the pleasure of working for the National Football League for 7 years. And at the time that I got there, it was 1994, 1995, NFL.com was just launching. And I was a PR assistant. And what my role was to upload content to a new emerging internal website they were using called NFLmedia.com, which included injury reports, depth charts, statuses. And so I was working with all 30 teams at the time. Dan, that's how old I am. There were only 30 NFL teams at the time to collect content. And what happened was I found myself just growing with the new digital entity. So NFL.com was brand new. I started working on that website in the very early years when we were working with an outsourced technology firm called Starwave based in Seattle. It was a Paul Allen company. And then eventually that became the ESPN Internet Ventures. So it's just very early in my career, I had this opportunity to grow with something that was in a 75-year-old organization. The NFL was 75 in 1995 when that launched, but I was able to grow with it. And because I had these connections at the NFL teams, because I was calling them every Monday and Tuesday for the depth charts and rosters and things like that, I got to work with them on entering all of the information that brought the NFL teams together. So one of my roles was to fly out to a lot of the different teams and league meetings and present the concept of the NFL Internet Network, which is based on a model of shared benefits. So now on big collective websites, it's pretty typical to see some sort of navigation bar across the top where you could flip around between related brands. But at the time, that was very new. And in a lot of a lot of the conversations I had with the teams, they were mostly young people like me. We were all in our 20s. We had all been assigned the internet because really no one else was working on it. And everybody was pretty much gung-ho to join this NFL.com internet network. But there were definitely holdouts. There were teams that were succeeding just fine on their own, namely the Patriots, the Cowboys, the Raiders, who were a little bit slow to want to join the collective. And then those conversations would escalate up to the ownership level and the executive level. And boy, talk about having a front seat to like a huge learning opportunity on business and growth and the power of the collective. So that was just a really great opportunity for me as a young person. Ultimately, all of the teams ended up joining the NFL Internet Network, and now it makes up one of the largest reaching digital platforms in sports.
So did you learn anything about getting all sorts of different stakeholders on board? Because even though this was the dark days of the NFL before the Jacksonville Jaguars existed, I know we talk about, right. I mean, this is a lesson for more than just sports. The NFL, those teams, we forget, they're franchises. Anyone involved in franchisee marketing is going through this, or really anyone who's got to get a group of stakeholders going through a transformative time, which coincidentally, we are also in now with artificial intelligence. So is there anything you learned about, getting all those varied stakeholders, like you said, from, teams on the cutting edge, like maybe the Patriots, to teams that were more laggards, on board with something that was kind of maybe new and scary?
That's exactly right. And it's funny. I had a colleague who used to say, anytime you ask the teams to do anything, like send us this or fill this out or provide this information, she said a third. A third would do it right away. A third would do it in time. And the other third would never do it. So yeah, it's interesting to work with that many stakeholders. But what I observed, because I was too young to really contribute in any meaningful way, Daniel, other than trying to help, what I learned at the time was that you just have to find that model of shared benefits. You have to find what's best for the whole. And for us, one of the tricks was bringing in NFL films, which is actually where I started my career. I started my career for a year as a production and PR assistant at NFL Films. And what we did was we started bringing in video highlights. So on a Monday morning, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Oakland Raiders, the Dallas Cowboys, all of them could pull from this resource of clips of the preceding games. And at the NFL Films team had it done within about, probably like 12 hours. So we were able to offer something that was valuable to them while we were asking them to give up other things like maybe ticket sales or eBay auction rights or some of the other things that they had to manage up to the collective.
Yeah, that's great. And that's the benefit of being part of a bigger collective, like being a franchisee. Here's another lessons from your time in sports, but I think it's very applicable to anyone working in a medium or large organization. Build trust and consensus cross-functionally. So how'd you learn this lesson?
When I joined USA Hockey at the end of 2001, I came in to run the website. So I'd been at the NFL for 7 years, had a fabulous experience, but just looking for something new, looking for a little bit more of my own autonomy and responsibility, and came into USA Hockey as the director of internet communications. So I was basically just running the website. And there was a movement at that time to try to move registration online for USA Hockey, as well as coaching clinic registration. And then ultimately, we ended up building a tournament scoring tool for all of those volunteers and parents who were going to all these hockey games on the weekend and wanted to collect this data. That was a pretty big movement at the time, even though it seems pretty natural today. In 2001, that was not happening much in amateur sports. So I was coming from the NFL. I was not coming from hockey, Daniel. And I was working with a lot of former hockey players and coaches and hockey moms and hockey families. And I didn't have a lot of street cred. I remember sitting in a meeting and mispronouncing Chris Chelios's name, and the whole room laughed at me because I'd never heard of him. And no one cared that I knew like the third, outside linebacker for the Jaguars at that time. So I didn't have a lot of credibility coming in, but what I realized was drawing on that lesson of what are the shared benefits. I was able to forge a relationship with the head of the coaching department and forge a relationship with the head of the membership department and et cetera down the line. I had to build relationships with these people who were really just powerhouses in their field of expertise and very well respected. So explaining something as simple as online registration, not having to collect money locally, not having the delay, not having the mistakes in data of 500,000 members across the country, that was what really moved the tide to get those people on board with it. So, you have to build those relationships. You have to realize that when you're butting heads, those people have an objective and you have an objective, and you have to try to find the middle ground.
So was there anything you did specifically to build your hockey street cred? Because it's interesting you mentioned that. I've been asked before by like foreign language copywriters, like they're non-native speakers. What can they do to be better copywriters for English language companies? And I told them we're all non-native. Like when I started working, I early in my career, I was writing for high-end real estate. I moved into the software industry. I started working with like IBM, for example. It was very difficult because that was a whole new language. And to build my street cred, I subscribed, I remember at the time, to the print edition of eWeek magazine. And I would read eWeek cover to cover just so I could speak the language because that was a unique language. So was there anything you did to kind of like build that hockey street cred moving into what's essentially a new industry?
I watched a lot of hockey, and I think exactly what you just said. Or if you're trying to learn another language, I think you just watch a lot of movies and television shows in the language. But I will say, if any of my former colleagues at USA Hockey listen to this, I think they would say I still have no hockey street cred. But yes, I read a lot and I learned a lot. Coming out of football, I just loved football like you do, Daniel. And so it wasn't work to know everything there is to know about the history of the sport and who broke a touchdown record yesterday. But yeah, I would say I watched a lot of hockey. I read a lot. And again, forging those relationships means also sort of understanding the background of the people that you work with. And many of the people I worked with, like I said, had been either former players, former coaches, former administrators of large hockey programs. So I just learned a lot, not only about, the sport and the players and the rules, but I learned a lot about how ingrained USA Hockey is in the families of those folks who have kids playing and how important it is to them. They devote their weekends, their mornings, their free money, their excess money, the family time and resources. It's such an expensive sport and requires so much time. So I just kind of learned to love the passion at the same time that I started learning things like what's a 5-hole.
So, does that so there's the ability to then like speak fluently and get some credibility, but does that help you find good stories then that you can tell through the marketing campaigns? Because USA Hockey is an example. Also, I know you work for the U.S. Olympic Committee, which we're about to talk about. I mean, is that a great way to kind of dive in and find those stories?
It absolutely is, because again, going back to USA Hockey, it's 500,000 members across the country. In many of those instances, the parents, as you know, or anybody listening who has kids who are in a sport that's so intensive, you're giving up your free time and you're giving up, again, like it costs a lot of money. You're making choices like, okay, our vacation is going to be this hockey tournament in Chicago instead of the trip I want to take to Disney World. So there's so much of a support network around those athletes. And it's funny, you have to get older. I was a competitive swimmer. I swam in Division I and in college. And I mean, my parents devoted so much time, money, effort, resources, but you don't realize it till later. But those athletes and the Olympians and Paralympians that we'll talk about in a minute have such a support system. And it's not just them dedicated to their sport every day in the pool, on the hockey rink, on the ice. It's really the families, the support system, the coaches, even the siblings get dragged along and have to sort of participate. So when you talk about the personal stories, it's about everybody. It's not just about them.
Yeah, that is so true. So, we talked about that you weren't experienced in hockey. Probably, you had to learn it. But there are some things that we are experienced in when we move into any industries, right? The things that we do in marketing are probably consistent across different industries. And one of the lessons you have is trust in your knowledge and capability. So maybe not knowledge about the specific industry, but your knowledge about marketing in general. You said you learned this by working with the U.S. Olympic Committee. So how'd you learn this lesson?
When I got to the U.S. Olympic Committee, so that was 2008. So we had just come out of really, I would say, my time at USA Hockey. In addition to having to learn a little bit more about the sport of hockey, but it was really more about digital product development. So I spent most of my time at USA Hockey focused on product development, building the online registration and understanding the user experience and understanding where it failed, building this network. I didn't mention, but we offered a free website platform to over 1,000 local hockey programs nationwide. So it was really much more about digital development. Now, Daniel, I come from a psychology background. My first job was at NFL Films and production. I don't have a digital marketing background other than I've been doing it for so long. So when I say draw on your own abilities, I joined the U.S. Olympic Committee to run the website and create a Team USA network of websites for all of the sports. There are 45 sports in the Olympic and Paralympic movement. I was like, no problem. I got this. I've already been through this twice with two other organizations. But when I joined in 2008, guess what else was starting to hit the market? Social media and applets that you used to play these things like, which Disney character are you, if you remember those apps that we were building on Facebook. All of a sudden, mobile apps were something that we had to use. I launched a YouTube channel for the U.S. Olympic Committee that, I had never done that level of video production before. So what I would say was that in every instance, I just focused on the storytelling and the fact that this was one more platform to use. And then you have to learn as you go. Going back to the USA Hockey days, I at one point I kind of realized there wasn't a single day that went by that someone didn't come into my office, close the door, and say, "We have a problem." I just got used to that. Anyone who's done digital product development, especially when the user experience is so critical to the success, anyone knows that every day you have a problem. Some platform is not consistent with the KPI you're requesting or the data platform. So you just have to go every day when you're building something new, you just have to face every day with the bigger picture in mind and get through the challenge every single day.
Well, experience helps you do that, right? But was there a time maybe earlier in your career where it was hard to trust in yourself? Or when you made a big new leap? I'll give you an example. I interviewed Michael Diamond from NYU on the How I Made It in Marketing podcast. And one of his lessons was trust yourself, because when he moved into the CMO position at Time Warner Cable, there's this moment where his executive assistant gave him this rock engraved with trust yourself. And he realized that moving into this new C-level role, he kind of wasn't doing what he'd done throughout his career, which was really, like you said, trust in those basic abilities. So was there a time that really sticks out to you where it's I don't know, it was hard to trust yourself. You were afraid. Maybe it was different this time. Maybe it wouldn't work. And then how you overcame that?
I would say that happened for me during my 7 years at the U.S. Olympic Committee because, as mentioned, I came in as a website director, no problem. But then we were launching social media platforms. Then we were launching mobile apps. We were launching applets within social media. And ultimately, again, with that YouTube channel, we created 57 hours of video production. And then I got into a new area. I was responsible for the digital licensing business that had been kind of passed down to me, which was a whole new set of rules. Daniel. The International Olympic Committee owned the rights to video footage from the Olympics, so you can only use it inside your geo-fenced region of authority. So there were all kinds of things that I had to learn in terms of, who owns the code base and what are the rules of the partners that you're working with and what's the, how do you understand intellectual property and how do you protect it? So drawing on that idea of learning from your past and just having faith in yourself, I think that hit me frequently when we would launch new things. One thing about my career, which has been consistent, is that I've actually only worked for 4 organizations for 7 years each. And in every organization, it had, years and years of brand equity. These are organizations that have been around for a long time, 75 years, the NFL and USA Hockey had been around 60 years. But every time I was launching new products or new digital platforms within those old time, really staid organizations. So you just learn to trust yourself. I would not say that's how I characterized my stuff, my approach to working in the 90s. I would say I just really relied on the really, really smart people around me who were teaching me. But when you get into that position of a marketing director or a marketing vice president, you don't have a lot of people around you who are going to help you see the way. So you do, I think a rock that says trust yourself is a great idea. But the best thing you could do as a marketing leader, the higher up that ladder you go, is hire the smartest people, hire the best people, hire people who want to be a team, not people who are trying to clobber each other on the way to the top. I think we all can recognize the difference after you've been in the market for a while. But, trusting the people around you is just as good as trusting yourself when you're a leader.
Yeah, well, you mentioned, you worked at 4 organizations, but you also, in the middle of your career recently made this major switch from the sports industry to now the healthcare industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned a lesson you learned there is take a bulldog approach. So what do you mean by that, and how did you learn that?
Yeah, the bulldog approach, I don't know if that's the right way to describe it or not, but you just have to make it work. Some people would say just get it done or just do it. You pull from that Nike line. But when I joined Ingenovis Health, it was actually 2 brands. It was 2015. It was 2 leading brands, Fast Staff Travel Nursing and the U.S. Nursing Corporation, which were placing healthcare staffing professionals in urgent and crucial situations. So in the midst of really learning a new industry, I'd been in sports 20 years, and now all of a sudden I'm in healthcare staffing, and the Affordable Care Act was really affecting the healthcare industry in a very big way. You just have to find your way. You just have to keep moving forward. And the way that I did that was creating methods of accountability. So what I did was brought in a really strong digital marketing automation team. And then I still do run my department according to 2 principles. Number 1, track and report. Because, in marketing, you can never make smart decisions, strategic decisions without knowing what's actually driving the conversions you need. And then the second guiding principle I ran that team with was be the subject matter expert. So if you're responsible for the text blast, you need to understand everything related to privacy and the California Consumer Privacy Act and what's coming in terms of where providers will block you. You can't just send out your text blasts every day and think your day's done. You need to be the subject matter expert and understand everything about that platform and that medium. I feel like that's a good growth opportunity for the younger people on my team. And then also it strengthens the company because you're protecting yourself against risk. The bulldog approach idea is that things will hit you fast in a growth situation. One of your, I can't remember who it was, Daniel, but one of your previous guests said that growth can be excruciating. And as I was listening to that podcast, I was thinking, man, is that true? Because when you have some success and it builds upon it, the expectation is that you're just going to continue growing at 20%, 30%, and that anybody can send anything your way and you can take it on. And I feel that way about my team now. One of them had a saying on her door that said, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to find out. And I feel like that's the mindset that we have in a company that's been growing so quickly. When we started facing the pandemic, Fast Staff and U.S. Nursing, the 2 brands I was working for at the time, were among the very first to send nurses into COVID outbreaks where, the nurses on the ground it was so contagious. The nurses were getting infected and then had to go quarantine for 2 weeks, if you'll remember. And our companies within 24 hours would find 20 nurses, 30 nurses, send them up to I can't remember, maybe it was Kirkland or Kirkwood up in Seattle where they had that first breakout, and then Northern California. So talk about taking a bulldog approach. We just had to figure it out. How do we move so quickly? How do we use offshore resources? How do we get smarter and become more competitive? Because this is a life and death situation, and we have the pleasure and the privilege of being able to make an impact.
Yeah, great. And the lesson you mentioned, growth can be excruciating. That was Pete Housley, the CMO of Unbounce, talking about some lessons from earlier in his career. That's great. So we just talked about some lessons that we can learn from the things Lauren made in her career. We're about to talk about lessons that we can learn from the people she collaborated with, because those are the 2 great things we get to do as marketers. We get to build things and get to build them with people. But first, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs Institute, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. You can join the MECLabs AI Guild to discover a path through the AI revolution. Learn more by chatting with MECLabs AI at meclabs.com/AI. That is MECLABS.com/AI. Okay, as we mentioned, We learned a lot of lessons from the things you made, Lauren. But now let's learn some lessons from the people you collaborated with. And you started from the very beginning of your career, literally when you were born. You said, this lesson is from your parents. You said, pair a strong work ethic with a sense of joy in accomplishment. So how has what your parents taught you paid off in your career?
So many times, Daniel, and I'm sure a lot of people would say this, like you just realize as you get older how much you're, just influenced by them. But my parents were hardworking kids from Brooklyn, like you, born in Brooklyn, and both of them paid their way through college and graduate school. And then each of them rose to the top of their profession. So constantly I witnessed a work ethic and a sense of joy and accomplishment and also teamwork. And so that's something that I feel like I bring to my teams every day. My mom is a highly productive person. Like if she wasn't making 40 meatballs to stick in the freezer for later, we were outside with scissors cutting the weeds out of the garden. And I feel like with my team in that bulldog approach, there's so much that we have to produce and we just want to get better and do more every day. And we want to do it strategically. So I feel like I drive the team hard, but none of them have ever put a hand up and said, okay, now wait a minute, that's too much. So my parents were really a big influence on me. And then one of my mentors who I still try to emulate to this day was at USA Hockey, the head of marketing and communications at the time was Mike Birch, who was also a former hockey coach, but then had created, just a really successful career in business. And I admired him for his strategic vision, for his high integrity. But mostly he created a team that just was based on respect and unity. And as I talked about, we were launching all these new things, a coaching clinic registration and online registration. It was a major shift for people who had done things a certain way for years and years. And when you're building digital platforms, you hit all kinds, it's like a thicket of obstacles. And Mike Birch was just standing there with me every step of the way. And I feel like one of the things he did for me was he gave me the confidence to forge ahead, even when the path was unclear. So, somehow he built that confidence in me, like you can do it. And if you fail, I'm right here standing next to you. So don't be too scared to try new things. So that was really important to me in my career. And then finally, my current...
Let me ask you about that. You mentioned, the lesson from Mike was stand right beside your team when they face obstacles. And I wonder if you can give us an example, like what's the most effective tactic or behavior of how you stood by your team, maybe through COVID or through something else? Because, for example, I interviewed Dr. Marcus Collins of Wieden & Kennedy, New York, and University of Michigan on how I made it in marketing. And one of his lessons was you don't build community, you facilitate community. And he learned this by working with Beyonce and with the Bay Hive and stuff. And so I know, the Bay Hive is very different from building a marketing team, but I think there's a similar truism there where, we sometimes we say like we're building a team, but I think we're more facilitating it. So I don't know, what tactic has worked for you to stand by your team, especially through going something like COVID?
I think any marketer can relate to this. I would say know your data. Because when you work on marketing, it's pretty typical that when times get tough or you're not, you're not hitting the numbers you want, it's pretty typical that marketing is the first group in the organization to take the shot. But what we do is try to think strategically and again, track and report, track everything you're doing. So you've got to know that the top of the funnel, what you're bringing into the top of the funnel, the leads, the candidates, whatever your business is, you've got to know that all of the dollars you're spending are converting the way you want them to. But then you have to be a partner at the bottom of the funnel. You can't just flip the leads over to sales and be like, good luck, hope it works. You've got to be partnered with them all the way to the bottom of the funnel. So I think tactically with my team, I spend a lot of time on performance marketing. We look at engagement. We look at ways that we can foster engagement. How can we use digital automation to continue to move, leads through a funnel through drip campaigns or other nurture campaigns or other content marketing, SEO blogs, using ChatGPT to try to move quicker and be more effective and understand what our competitors are saying. So I've always been half in the weeds and half at the top of the vision, trying to understand the long-term vision. But being in the weeds for me is sort of how I support my team, especially when they're when they're getting questioned by other parts of the organization.
And has there been anything on a human level, that has worked well for you? Because, we talked about the mergers and acquisitions help build your company. You go through COVID. It looks like, you're managing a team of over 30. It looks like you have a work at home setup. You're working at home right now. I'm working at home, which can, be more difficult. So has there been anything more on a human level to help you stand by your team? Has the data helped you there, or was there something else that you've used?
For me, it's been leaders. When you talk about human level, it's been the leaders. So again, Mike Birch at USA Hockey, helping a young person with a lot of responsibility build the confidence that you can do it. That's something that I want to pass down. Again, my current CEO, Bart Valdez, when he came into the company in 2019, the company was in a period of decline. And he, as you said, he really came in quietly. He found immediate operational efficiencies. He reorganized the company in a way that set us up for an upward path to growth. And then when COVID overtook our lives and our business a year later, we were prepared to scale to the challenge and we tripled that business. And I think all of us, not only were we on a rocket ship of growth, but we saw that we were making an impact every single day in the lives of patients in over 500 hospitals across the country. So, it's really important for me to be able to look to my leader and see if that person is supporting me, supporting my teams, recognizing what we're doing, and then try to model that, that level of leadership. Another thing about Bart is that he's a steady leader. He's unflappable. He's always supportive. He creates a sense of team that can accomplish anything. And when I observe the marketing team that we have right now, I'm very proud of them. I feel like they do that. They're unflappable. They're always supportive. They feel like they can accomplish anything. So I feel like passing that down is a really important way that I can mentor passively, in addition to looking for mentorship opportunities. But you're just always setting an example for the people around you and the people who are working for you.
Well, when you mentioned that coming quietly, and I love that because that is so the opposite sometimes of our culture of just boasting on the front end and thinking we know everything, right? So you might say, I think that works great for mergers and acquisitions, but I also wonder about one of your quote unquote customers, which is the actual nurses and healthcare professionals themselves, right? I'm sure your customers are the hospitals, but also these nurses and healthcare professionals, I'm sure that, they need to be able to do its best medically. They need to feel supported. They're upending their lives, moving around the country. So I would think when communicating with them, there are one of two ways you can go. You could take a very, dictatorial approach of like, this is how it's going to be, or kind of the come in quiet approach and support them. So is there anything you learned in kind of supporting? I know we talked about your marketing team, but now these actual healthcare employees around the country who went through COVID and just on a daily basis go through all these things they have to do to both deliver healthcare and to move themselves around the country and upend their lives. Like, have you learned anything from that?
Absolutely. It's been an incredible learning journey for me. And, Daniel, I'm sure other people feel this way when they make career switches. I was really hesitant to leave sports after a 21-year career where I felt like, oh, I can understand this industry. I was pretty hesitant to join this company in healthcare staffing. But the more I learned about it, the more I just understood how human it is and how inspiring it is. And what the nurses and doctors and allied professionals went through, particularly during COVID, just filled me with awe about what they, how much they commit, how much they sacrifice. For every nurse, every doctor who was in there in COVID and couldn't go home or had to, decontaminate themselves in the garage and take off every piece of clothing and then take a shower before even greeting their kids, you just realize how much they sacrifice. So for me, over the last 7 years, we talked about when I got to the company, it was two brands. It was Fast Staff and US Nursing. It was about a $250 million combined revenue. But Ingenovis Health in 2021 merged four brands and then acquired three more. And we were part of one of the biggest mergers and acquisitions in the healthcare staffing industry. Today, as you mentioned, we're, in 2022, we reported $2 billion in revenue. But one of the most important things I think we did in the midst of all that business growth was Bart Valdez, our CEO, slowed us down at the beginning of the merger and said, we've got to create a clinician-focused purpose. And that was because during COVID, you probably read, there were all kinds of studies that the attrition rate, 3 out of 10 nurses wanted to leave the bedside. And the attrition rate among doctors was at about 40%. So Bart recognized very early, something that was very obvious to a lot of people, is that we're facing one of the worst healthcare shortages we've ever seen, Daniel, and there's no sign that it's going to stop. It's compounding. It's getting worse. Between baby boomer retirement, COVID burnout, and attrition, there are now not enough nurses to fill the gaps. So Bart set a small group of us to task and said, put together a clinician focused purpose for this brand new entity, this big, huge, powerful, successful company, Ingenovis Health. And we ended up establishing the purpose statement to build a home for healthcare talent. And when we set that purpose statement, the idea is that healthcare talent can move around within this ecosystem of opportunity. They can step away from the bedside if they're burnt out and take, a clinical position that's remote or maybe telehealth, or they can jump right into something like a strike and work a 60-hour week and be at the bedside providing the closest level of care. So the clinician-focused purpose for us was really important. It's something that, as the first chief marketing officer, I had a privilege to be, part of the group that was able to push that forward. And then we also launched a program called the ACT program, which stands for Advocacy, Careers, Tools, so that we can support the well-being and the careers of the nurses, doctors, and allied professionals who work for us. So for us, the ACT program, which is it's just a series of resources, tools, advocacy that supports all of our clinicians, that is our manifestation of our purpose statement. So, over the last 2 years, being able to be part of the team that, put together the purpose and launched this program, and then seeing it in action is very inspiring. We use it to attract good talent to the organization, and we also use it as a guiding light in all of our decisions about budget, resources, and focus.
Well, Lauren, we've talked about so many different things about what you've done in your marketing career. I wonder if you had to break it down. What are the key qualities of an effective marketer? What do you seek for your own career? What do you look for when you're hiring?
So I think that strategy and integrity for me however, almost 30 years of working now, strategy in marketing is the most important thing. You've got to understand all of the results. You've got to be tracking your numbers. You've got to understand your customer, your fan in the case of sports, your candidate in the case of healthcare staffing. I really enjoy listening to your show, Daniel. And one of the reasons I love
Thank
it
you.
is because different marketers in different verticals use, some use Reddit to understand the customer and some actually go into the stores. And I liked hearing about the woman who actually went into the bathrooms because they were trying to sell Jergens lotion. And she wanted to know, how do they display it? Do they put it under the counter because they're not really proud of it? Or did they put it up there with their $100 perfume? So, understanding your customer and then strategically aligning all of your digital platforms, all of your tracking, all of your survey information, your research information, so that you're making the best decisions with your budget. That's how you become an effective marketer. I think the way that you become an inspiring marketer is using the purpose to inspire the people who work for you and to try to drive the business forward and drive revenue. Again, for me, I've always been able to work for really purposeful organizations. Ingenovis Health with the purpose to support these healthcare clinicians, and the U.S. Olympic Committee in building just sustainable competitive excellence for these Olympians and Paralympians. I've always been able to work for purposeful companies. You have to lead with integrity. You have to lead with that purpose. You have to model, act the way you want others to act. I think that you have a big influence, especially over product development and engagement. So it's just a pleasure in my mind being part of the marketing org.
Well, I love that. Don't just be an effective marketer, be an inspiring marketer. This was an inspiring conversation, Lauren. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. But actually, I want to call back something that you mentioned earlier, Daniel, if we have a few minutes here.
Sure.
So Marcus Collins, I took his class. He's a professor at the University of Michigan Business School, the Ross School of Business. And I took an executive education class with him where he talked about building that social media group out of the Beehive. And this is what's really interesting is, as you said, his quote was, you don't build communities, you facilitate them. I want to tell you one story for the U.S. Olympic Committee. When we started figuring out what social media was back in 2008 and 2009, Facebook was the first platform where we wanted to be engaged with fans. And when we started, cruising around Facebook to see what was happening related to the Olympics, we found an Olympic fan site that had 77,000 followers. It had been formed by a woman named Stephanie from the Midwest. And I just started reaching out to her and saying, how did you build this fan site? What do people care about? What questions do they ask? And just through a series of phone calls with her, I got to the point where I mustered up my courage and said, Stephanie, is it okay if we take over the fan site that you've already built with your 77,000 fans? And so we had exactly the same experience as Marcus Collins, who discovered the Beehive, a group that was already engaged in talking about Beyonce. And we ended up growing that platform to over 2.5 million within about a year or so through some really smart digital marketing, and then just the power of that engagement and the storytelling. So I thought that was funny when I listened to Marcus tell that story.
No, that's perfect. I think sometimes when we go into a new channel, whatever it may be, we come in with whatever corporate messaging idea we have versus first taking the time to go in and listen and seeing if there are conversations going in there already about either our brand or our industry or our product, and how we can, get involved in those versus just coming in, from the top down and saying the way it's going to be. Well, that was awesome, Lauren. I think that was the first curtain call we've ever had on the How I Made It Marketing podcast. That was a bit like Springsteen, where you thought, no, that's it, and then boom, he comes back and he plays Thunder Road and he just brings the house down. So thanks for the curtain call, Lauren, and thanks for all of your time today.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate the time.
And thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.